project was to see if these systems and subsystems can be duplicated with earthly materials.
Bob, when these engines, for lack of a better word, were running, was there any audible noise? You were there in the room. I mean, was there, other than the test of putting your hand up, was there anything that hit your sensory system that you could describe when these things were running?
On the test setup in the room, it was completely silent. That's why I wasn't even sure if the thing was operating. However, during the test flight of the craft, with all three amplifiers operating, there was a definite hiss and corona discharge on the bottom of the craft.
A hiss?
Now, a hiss, like a high voltage hiss. If you ever been around, high voltage power lines or high power transmitters, you must have.
Of course.
And you have that familiar high voltage hiss.
And you said a corona discharge.
A corona discharge, which is kind of not a St. Elmo's fire, but a blue glow that you typically see, again, around high voltage systems, and what's happening in the air is breaking down and emitting photons, and, it glows. It's the same reason why lightning bolts are visible.
Indeed.
It was obvious there was high voltage on the skin of the craft, and obviously it was leaking off because that sound is unmistakable. As the craft lifted off higher, and approached 20 or 30 feet, the sound disappeared, so it was obviously interacting with the ground.
Fascinating.
So just in free flight, there'd be no sound at all.
Now, do you know, you say there were 3 emitters on each craft. Do you know offhand how these emitters in flight were manipulated to, for example, leave the ground and then begin propulsion that would take you horizontal or vertical or wherever you wanted to go? Do you know how that energy was manipulated?
Yeah. The craft operate in 2 modes. It's Omicron and Delta. Omicron is using a single amplifier to move the craft, and Delta uses all 3 amplifiers. Whenever a craft is near another gravitational source, such as a planet or whatever, it's only using 1 amplifier to lift itself off the ground. The amplifiers are these, like I said, or I keep using the word amplifier, the emitters are these 4-foot long, 2-foot diameter pieces of pipe, essentially, held by a 2 or 2.5 foot, 3-inch diameter flexible pipe. And these hang in the bottom of the craft. One of them points down, and it produces a gravitational wave that will lift the craft off the ground. The other 2 are swung almost horizontally. So in the bottom of the craft, they're really pointing out in front of it.
Gotcha.
Now, most vehicles and aircraft that we're used to either accelerate hot gas out the back or use a propeller and, throw air out the back and the craft moves forward.
Sure.
These do the exact opposite. And my best analogy for it is the old rubber sheet or the bed. If you take a bowling ball and stick it in the middle of your bed, and in front of the bowling ball, about 2 feet, take your fist and just push it deep into the bed, what happens? The bowling ball rolls forward.
Absolutely.
So this is exactly what they're doing. The craft is standing using 1 gravity emitter, standing on a gravitational wave, and they're using the other 2 essentially to make a little divot, a gravity well in front of the craft.
I understand.
And it rolls forward. And it's why they look so ridiculous when they're in that low-speed mode, because it's an unstable form of flight.
Well, that was going to be my question. When they do the vertical lift, I wonder how, of course I don't understand how that energy is distributed, but I wonder how the craft is stable as it goes vertical.
Well, the gravitational wave is propagating from the emitter, not in a linear fashion, but it's diverging. So it's on a pedestal, almost like a pyramid.
Oh,
so the bottom is so stable.
Yeah.
In fact, as it goes higher, because area of the base increases, it becomes more stable. It's only when it's very close to the ground that it's wobbly and kind of goofy looking for such an advanced machine.
No, I've got it. And look, people should understand that not just your word tonight, but thousands and thousands of people have gone to, as close as they can get to Area 51, and they have seen, there's 1 million eyewitnesses that have seen craft being tested over those years, so that a lot of witnesses to what you're saying right now about how they flew.
I had, if you remember at the time, I had the test flight schedule, and I brought, when I started to leak some information, I brought my friends out there at night. John Lear was one of the first people out there, and, we brought a big 10-inch Celestron telescope. And, at that time, you could get a hell of a lot closer to Area 51 than you can now.
Yes, I know.
And, we all saw what was going on.
I am curious about this. Let me ask. You obviously had been treated to plenty of security warnings, probably had to sign a bunch of crap. And so you made some kind of decision at some point to begin leaking stuff. Describe to me how you went through that metamorphosis. How did you get there?
Well, I was perfectly content with the way things were going. Once you're on the inside, it's a different state of mind. And, if you're on the outside of something, hey, it's not fair, we all should have this information, so on and so forth. But, you get kind of a change of attitude. Once you become privy to the information, you go, those guys don't deserve to know anyway. But that does change after a while. And the impetus really had nothing to do with me initially. Remember, they were still going through all my security whatnot, whatever they do to...
It goes on.
They do everything in there. They're very concerned about your mental state, because that, if a person is very depressed or despondent or something like that, it's going to affect their work performance, and especially if they're trusting them with very important secrets, there's going to be a problem.
National security.
Exactly. And now I had given a written order to have my phone monitored and myself monitored.
God, that's something to give. I mean, I know you're a pretty private person, but to give...
But I was excited to work on this. That was nothing.
More exciting than being monitored.
Oh, by far. And I was absolutely following the rules. At the time I was married, and I wasn't saying anything to my wife, and initially this is where the problem began. And, what do you say? You leave the house at 11 o'clock at night. Where are you going? Oh, I'm going to work. Yeah, really? And, night after, and then you come home, 6, 7 hours later. Where were you? I was at work.
At work.
Yeah, and, after a while, it begins to sound like you're having an affair.
Yeah, of course.
Well, that's exactly
what happened.
That's exactly what happened. And
oh, brother.
As time went on, my wife began to have an affair. And they knew it, and I didn't, because they monitored the phone.
This is all new stuff. I've never heard any of this.
So they had all the written transcripts of what was going on.
Oh, my God.
And they stopped calling me out to work because they had to make a decision on what to do. They were either going to just let it sit and, see what happened, if we broke up or, that ended or whatever.
But at any rate, you were suddenly a risk.
Yeah, and, at that time, they had stopped calling me out, and I kind of began to get a little concerned, and this is when I had the flight schedule and brought a few of my friends out at the time, including my wife, and, showed them what I was doing at night.
Oh.
And they all saw that, and in fact, we got away with it the first night, and we got a little greedy and went a couple other times. And we finally got caught. And,
how many of you got caught, and what happened?
I think it was 4 of us. And we were standing there, out close to Area 51 in the absolute black desert where you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Yeah. Now, we had been staying there about half an hour, and my friend Gene and I were sitting there joking about, well, maybe we should just take the base by force, and, just saying